So we'll discuss some Minyane Tu B'Av, which we celebrated on Friday. Of course, celebration means we didn't say Tachanan. That's about usually the extent of someone's celebration. But either, let's find out what the Gemara says about Tu B'Av. So the Gemara says in Tainis and Laman Ababeis, Amar Rav Shem ben Gamliel, Uhayu Yamin Tov Yisrael, B'chamisha B'Sa'ar V'Yom HaKippurim. The two happiest days of the year on the Jewish calendar. I guess Purim and Simchas Torah, you would think, but the Gemara doesn't give either. The Gemara says Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, B'Yishchol Yom HaKippurim. I understand Yom Kippur, certainly from a spiritual sense, because it's a day of Slicha or Mechila. It's a day of forgiveness. You're forgiven for all your sins if you do tshuva. There is one opinion, Rabbi. Unfortunately or fortunately that we don't paskin like that. Yom Kippur is mechaper even without tshuva. But we hold you, the key is kapara, not tahara, but that's a separate year. But Yom Kippur is a day of forgiveness. And therefore, sins separates us from God. So when we have no sins, we get closer to God. And we are, Simcha means in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore Yom Kippur is one of the happiest days of the year. However, for Tu B'Av, what's Tu B'Av? Nice. Where's Nishma? So Tu B'Av, so what happened? So Yom Kippur we established as the happiest day. What about Tu B'Av? The Gemara is going to marshal a number of reasons what happened on Tu B'Av to make it the happiest day of the year. So one answer the Gemara says is, what happened? It says, Yom Shehuchu Shvatim Lavo Zeh Bazeh. It was the happiest day ever. You know what? They permitted intermarriage.
Oh, yes.
I guess we're in a very happy state because what's the intermarriage rate today? Unfortunately, every year I say it, unfortunately, it gets higher. So I guess it's a day of Simcha. Now, that's not the intermarriage the Gemara is talking about. The Simcha here is at one point based on Yerusha. We know because Beno Sfafad inherited the land, and therefore there was issues with transferring property, and so everything got settled. So there was a Horasha, they didn't know at the time, but there was a halacha that you couldn't intermarry among tribes. It might mess up the real transfer of land. However, on Tu B'Av, they came to the realization this is only a temporary thing for the Dor HaMidbar, but once they got settled in, so then they realized that they could marry. So it was on Tu B'Av the realization came that one is permitted, you can marry among the Shvatim. So it was a very happy day because you can marry among the Shvatim. In fact, I guess that's also, it fits in well because Tu B'Av is the day where they have Shidduchim. Maybe that's why. This is the day that the Shvatim were able to marry among each other. Maybe that's why the meaning of looking for Shidduchim on Tisha B'Av. It's only the second reason the Gemara gives. What's the next reason the Gemara gives? Yom Shehuter Sheva Binyamin Lovo Bekahal. That, of course, we have the Navi crowd here. Although, are you guys still, where are you hanging out? In Malachim, Shmuel, where are you up to these days? Unfortunately, if I don't remember Shoftim, but that's the story with Peleges Begiva. There was a terrible incident in Nach. You can look it up in Sefer Shoftim, where something happened with Sheva Binyamin, a terrible case, and therefore the Jews took upon themselves, we want nothing to do with Sheva Binyamin. During those days, people used to make a macha. People had standards when people did terrible things that bothered them instead of becoming famous on Twitter and Facebook and all the other sites. There was some form of morality then, and therefore they made a stand. However, they realized also, based on Psukim, it was only the Horasha. That on Tu B'Av also, it was realized, you know what? It was only for that period, for when it happened, but not for future generations. And therefore, they realized on Tu B'Av that you could also marry someone from Sheva Binyamin. So two of the first 6 things are things that have to do with Shidduchim. That they realized these things didn't happen on Tu B'Av. The realization happened on Tu B'Av that they're permitted either to marry among the Shvatim or they can marry in Sheva Binyamin. The third thing the Gemara gives is Yom Shakol Bo Meisi Hamidbar. The third thing is it's the day when the Jews stopped dying in the Midbar. We know because of the sin the Jews committed, they were punished and they weren't able to enter the land of Israel. So the Dor HaMidbar were punished. So what happened was every year the discussion exactly, let's say, out of the certain amount died every year, whether it was 15,000, whatever the amount was, to figure out the math times 40, 600,000, whatever it was, between 20 and 60. And every year, let's assume a certain amount died. And this year, what happened was, so what did they do? Every year, on Tisha B'Av, the Medrash says, a very graphic scene. Yeah. So on Tisha B'Av, they used to go ahead and they used to everyone used to dig their own graves, literally, at least according to the Medrash, and they used to go to sleep in the graves. And those who woke up walked out. Those who did not, they finished off the burial. So this went on. That's how they used to do it in the Midbar. And what happened was on Tisha B'Av, the last year, everyone walked out. They said, okay, we made a mistake. It was only the 8th day of Av. So the next day they did it, really not good on counting this year, and they did it for about a week. Until on Tu B'Av, they saw the full moon or however they figured out. On Tu B'Av, they realized, wait a second, it's not that we got the date wrong, that the Chastei Hashem, the Chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's going to leave, the people, the last year aren't going to die. So the discussion was whether no one died that year or a less amount, but whatever the Chesed of Hashem was, that some people who were destined to die did not. And it was real, again, this really happened on Tisha B'Av, but as we see, it's the idea, it's the knowledge, the realization of the Nes that's important. It's not the Nes, I'm sure the Nes itself is important also, but we celebrate the Yediyat HaNes. That's the Yisod we have many times, especially when it comes to miracles, when it says, like Kriyas Yamsuf is known as the prototype of all miracles. Why Kriyas Yamsuf? Because what happened in Kriyas Yamsuf is Vayaminu V'Hashem V'Moshe Avdo. In other words, there are many other greater Nisim that happen in terms of qualitative Nisim. So why do we use Kriyas Yamsuf as the prototype? It's because it's not the nature of the miracle, the quality of the nes, it's what happened after the nes. The whole important thing of a miracle is to realize it's from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God does needs for us every day, but we don't realize it, then what's it all about? We woke up this morning. But the nes of Kriyas Yamsuf is that they realized right afterwards what happened. They increased the Emunah B'Hashem Moshe Avdo. And therefore, so over here on Tu B'Av, even though the nes happened on Tisha B'Av, that's when those who were supposed to die did not, but the realization of the nes happened on Tu B'Av, and therefore that's why we celebrate Tu B'Av as a day of Simcha, that we realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu let those people live. That was the third thing that happened on Tu B'Av. The fourth thing the Gemara gives is Yom Shebitel Hosea ben Elah Perstios, that the day that Hosea ben Elah removed the idols. In other words, going back to Tanakh, going back to Navi, that Yerovam and Nevat was not one of the good kings, so to speak, and he stopped the Jews from going to the Ola Regel, to going to Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash, certainly when the Sholosh Regalim, and that was happening for years until finally when Hosea ben Elah, one of the kings also, who wasn't a tzaddik either, but he did some good things in his life, and this is one of them. He took down the guards from the roads, and he said, whoever wants to go can go. He didn't make anyone go, but he gave the Jews an opportunity to go to Eretz Yisrael and the Beis HaMikdash. And in fact, the Mefarshim point out, interesting, because of this, the Jews were punished. What do you mean the Jews were punished? Because when you have an opportunity and you don't take care of it, you get punished. In other words, up until then, they couldn't go to the Beis HaMikdash, so they would have been killed. So you don't have to give up your life to do Ola Regel. But when you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, you expect everyone would jump at it, but let's say very few people and not enough people went up, and because of that, the Jews were punished, because now you could go and you don't, so therefore you have to give a din v'cheshbon. So it's always, everything's a privilege and a responsibility. When you have an opportunity to do something and you don't, that's also a din v'cheshbon you have to give. So it says that because they had access to go to Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash and didn't go, but that's not what Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av is the day when they had the opportunity they had access. It was a happy day. So someone would point out from here, Kal V'chomer. Imagine today, post 1967, when we have Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, we have the holy city of Jerusalem back. So how much more so is that a day of celebration? If mere access to Yerushalayim was enough, everyone was waiting for Jerry. Where was he? So for mere access to Yerushalayim was enough to have us celebrate Tu B'Av, how much more so post 1967 we have it back, how much more so is that a day of celebration? So that's what they point out. That's the fourth thing that happened on Tu B'Av, that we had mere access to Yerushalayim. That was enough that they went ahead and to celebrate Tu B'Av. And we'll go into detail. Let's just get all the reasons first. Reason number 5. And by the way, we're on same time tomorrow morning. It is a holiday in Canada, by the way. So therefore we'll be continuing tomorrow. But the answer number 5. Rav Masna Amar, what else happened? Also Yom She Nitnu Haruge Beitar L'Kfura. It was the day that, again, during the history, the Bar Kokhba rebelled. At one point, even the great Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kokhba was the Melech HaMashiach. In fact, it's a discussion whether he was a minority view, but he argued on the Chachamim. The Chachamim said that grass will be growing on your forehead before the Mashiach. In other words, Bar Kokhba is not the Mashiach. But there's nothing wrong for him. If you learn the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, there was nothing wrong with him thinking he was. Because as long as he was Becheskes Mashiach, that he took, as long as the person actually, when it comes to the laws of who the Mashiach is, it's result oriented. Many people potentially, I wish Rabbi Akiva was I wish Bar Kokhba was, but he didn't fulfill the criteria of the Melech HaMashiach. So he's not at the Rambam. If people would have learned the Rambam, would have saved a lot of tragedies in Jewish history. People thinking, one could have thought, no Chabad around. People could have thought, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was the Mashiach. But what could I do? I wish he was also. But clearly he's not, because he's dead and the Mashiach's not here yet. So it's very result-oriented. So therefore, it's very clear. So therefore, what happened was the terrible thing, they got defeated after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And therefore, they point out that, so for a couple of years, the Jews suffered. And however, the miracle happened even a couple of years later. What happens to bodies when they're lying around? They decay and rot. So the nace happened on Tu B'Av. That what happened, that's what we say in our fourth blessing in the Birkas Hamazon, Hatov HaMeitiv. That it says, Hatov Shelo Hitzrichu, the Tov was that the bodies never decayed. The HaMeitiv Shed Nidnu L'Kvura, that tremendous miracle happened on Tu B'Av, that the Jews who are killed years ago, and in fact it was such a terrible massacre, the Gemara talks about how the farmers in Israel didn't need fertilizers for like 7 years afterwards because so much blood was spilled out on the ground. That's how bad it was. But the miracle was that the bodies didn't decay and they got a kfura that they all deserved. And therefore that happened on Tu B'Av. So on Tu B'Av, that's why it's the 5th reason for celebration. And the 6th and final reason the Gemara gives, what else happened on Tu B'Av? The Gemara says, Yom Shapastul B'Richros Eitzim L'Maracha. It was the day they stopped cutting wood for the Mizbeach, for the altar. So why is that a celebration? It was the day they stopped cutting wood for the altar. So why is that and why, first of all, why did they stop? Because the Gemara says, Mechamisha Shaba'ah, the Elach, Tasha Kocho Shacham. At least the days are going to get a little cooler, at least in Israel, not here. The heat of the sun hits on Tu B'Av. After Tu B'Av, it starts waning a bit. Because we don't go for worms in the Mizbeach on the wood. So the sun has to be strong enough to keep the worms out of the wood. And that why? So on Tu B'Av was the cutoff date. So on Tu B'Av, they stopped cutting wood for the altar for the Mizbeach. Why is that a happy occasion? So 2 schools of thought why it's happy. And they're both right. The Rashbam writes in Baba Basra, you know why it was a happy occasion? Because it was the Gemar HaMitzvah. They finished the mitzvah. Anytime you finish a mitzvah, it's a big simcha, like the Atzmos Yosef, the whole discussion there. But when you do, that's the whole concept of a siyam. And in fact, not too long ago, we had a siyam on Tu B'Av right around that time, a siyam Hashas. When you make a siyam, when you complete any mitzvah, it's a time for celebration. And therefore, that's why Tu B'Av it was the Gemara HaMitzvah, they finished cutting the wood. But others point out, and the Gemara seems to allude to this as well. So what do you do now? You finish cutting the wood, so you have a lot more free time now. So you got to add extra learning in your day. During the summertime, they got to learn more. They finished cutting the wood. They didn't have all the work they used to do. So what do you do when you have free time? What do you do when you have a civic holiday? You have another shir. You learn some more. Right. And that's what we learned from the lesson of Tu B'Av, that when you have some extra time, we see that Tu B'Av was a tremendous simcha because there was more time to learn. And therefore, let's summarize. Why is, we all know why Yom Kippur is the happiest day of the year. It's a Yom Slicho Machila. But why is Tu B'Av? What even happened on Tu B'Av that it's a happy day? Intermarriage, but the good intermarriage among the Shvatim, not among outside the Jewish faith. Intermarriage with Shevet Binyamin. Number 3, that Mesi HaMidbar stopped dying. Number 4, Hoshea and El removed the soldiers. They could go up to Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, and the Beis HaMikdash to go Ola Regel. Number 5, they were able to bury the Jews who were killed during Arugei Beitar. Hatov showing the Tzrichu Meisiv condition with Klur. And number 6, they stopped cutting the wood. Either it's the Gemar HaMitzvahs, the Simcha, or the extra time of learning. So we were discussing yesterday the different reasons for the celebration of Tu B'Av. That Tu B'Av is one of the happiest days of the year, and we explained either it was a day where the Gemara talks about where they had the shidduchim, that the women used to go around, borrow clothes and wear white, and go around, and it was a day where people made shidduchim. So, yeah.
I'm sorry. Interesting remark you made last time. Apparently, Purim and Simchas Torah didn't make the cut.
Exactly, yeah.
For whatever reason.
Right, so in terms of the nature of the celebration, right? So,
yes.
Right, we said Yom Kippur because it's a spiritual celebration, not that the other two aren't. And we pointed out that the first two had to do with shidduchim, that the tribes could intermarry one another, and the Shevet Binyamin, they moved on from the Horasha. So we discussed as well, just to go into more details, we went into the Mesi HaMidbar. So we said what happened, that every day on Tisha B'Av, they used to go onto the graves, and then whoever died. But this year nothing happened. So there's an interesting question the Achronim ask is, Rabbi Tam writes in Nida, how did they use to Makadesh? How did we know when the new month was? There's different ways. Today we do it. We have a calendar.
You look at the moon.
But back in the day, they were Makadesh Al-Pi Re'iyah. They used to look at the moon. So the kasha is, the Achronim asks, last I checked, the Jews had the Ananei HaKavod in the Midbar. So some say, well, how could it be Makadesh Al-Pi Re'iyah with the cloud of glory? So maybe you say it was transparent, I don't know. But they're assuming you couldn't see through the cloud of glory, so therefore how did the world did they know when the noon moon was? That was the kasha they asked, yeah?
But the kasha to work, would we have to assume that Adim had to go to a Sanhedrin even in the Midbar?
Right, that's the assumption. That's the assumption of Rabbi Tam. According to others, so maybe you could just say they were Makadesh Al-Pi Re'iyah in the Midbar. Yeah. But according to Rabbi Tam, and Nidu writes they were, so how according to him did they know that? Because what was the Gemara? Because when Tu B'Av they saw the full moon, they knew it was the decree. Yes. So how could you see it? That's the kasha they asked. So some want to answer. The Torah tells us one of the few yard sites the Torah gives us is who, or maybe the only, but at least whose yard site does the Torah give us in the Torah? We didn't have it that long ago. My namesake. Oh, yes. Albeit he's a Kohen, I'm a Levi, but the same Shevet. Aaron HaKohen, when did he die? The first of Av. Rosh Chodesh Av. So they point out, and Chazal tell us, we know that the Jews had 3 things in the Midbar to sustain them. They had the water from the Miriam. When Miriam died, they lost the water. Moshe Rabbeinu, the man. and Aaron was the Alei HaKavod. So the answer that when did this happen? So on Rosh Chodesh Av, Aaron died. They lost the Alei HaKavod. Now the moon became visible, and that's how they knew on Tisha B'av. That's how some want to suggest. But some ask, but it says, they got the Alei HaKavod back, B'schus Moshe, but it's unclear when they got it back. So we could say maybe they got it back a couple of weeks later. Maybe there was some gap time in between. But that, that's just interesting shayla by some achronim. Others also, you could assume Pashas there wasn't any. Maybe they weren't Makadosh al pi re'iyah. They just in the midbar. The whole thing wasn't derech hateva. Any wasn't the normal way. It was so. However, they figured out. That's how some point out. And in fact, that's what they mention as well. That it says so. Since when it seems it says what was the reason for the celebration? The reason for the celebration was that the Dor HaMidbar stopped dying. Because of the sin, so the 600,000 people were destined to die. So we say the miracle was the last year, either all of them or some of them stopped dying because of this. So the question is, it's nice that people stop dying, but it's a big jump to say it's more like a relief rally to say it's the biggest. It's a tremendous simcha because people stop dying. So why is people stop dying? Why is that a simcha? Meaning, obviously, it's sor meira. I understand why it's a good thing, but it's more like the bad is stopped and something good happened. But to the Vilna Gaon says, where do we find precedent for this? That when a magefa stopped, that we make a quasi yantiv. He said where else do we have a source for this? Even though this source probably came first, but he says this is the source for another holiday we have. Obviously, this is the first one. This is Midin HaGemara Tu B'Av. Albeit the other one more people heard of. It's more popular. The other holiday I'm about to tell you than this one, but this one obviously came first. This came in the Gemara. It's very popular in Israel, especially in Meron. Am I getting closer? Lag BaOmer. So Lag BaOmer, again, it never says it anywhere in the Gemara it happened. That's the Meiri, the Chidah. But the assumption is we know that 20, because of what we discussed yesterday, Rabbi Akiva, probably most likely it happened during the Bar Kokhba revolt. How could you have 20? It's 24,000 people. Imagine one day you wake up and McMaster disappeared. That's what happens in the summer, I guess. We see it every year. But imagine that McMaster disappears, about 25,000 people in Mac. So how could it be? So some want to explain historically. Maybe it was during the war, the Bar Kokhba revolt. That's when the reason for they died was because of what they did, but. They died as part of, it wasn't a magefa. The Gemara seems to say they died from askara, some type of painful stomach thing, but others say that, that might have, the Shalonogu covered zelazeh might have been the reason, but it didn't just, wasn't just some black plague, surrounded them one time. They might have, it's much easier to understand pragmatically during wartime, they died. So, so they point out that because that's what the Vilna Gaon writes. And the Vilna, because the Rama writes, when it comes to the holiday of Lag BaOmer, he calls it a mixus yantiv. That's the Rama, quasi yantiv, like Tu B'Av. So the Vilna Gaon in his usual cryptic style, meaning because the Baal Shem Tov was the king of Hasidus, of stories. So when you're telling hashkafa stories, any good storyteller knows how to drag it out. You know how to say nothing in a long time. That's the secret of a good storyteller. But when you're dealing with halacha, it's just the opposite. You got to be as concise as possible and right to the point. That's why the Vilna Gaon was the greatest. In fact, he's so good, no one knows what he's saying half the time. But he put some cryptic note when he talks about the Rama writing that we celebrate Lag BaOmer because, and he says, refer to the Gemara at the end of Tainus. This is our Gemara. So one of the many reasons the Gemara gives is the Mesi HaMidbar died. So we see, the Vilna Gaon says, we see that the Mesi HaMidbar died. That was enough to make Tu B'Av a mixas, a quasi yantiv. So too, that's the source of Lag BaOmer. The Lag BaOmer, the 24,000 stopped dying. That's our tradition. We don't have a Gemara like that, and therefore that's why Lag BaOmer is a mixed yontif. But in a similar note, those aren't the only things that happen. The question is that enough to make it a quasi yontif? Because even by Lag BaOmer, people say that's not the reason why we're celebrating. I mean, obviously, which we're happy it happened, but other things happen, like Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. That's why they're celebrating in Meron. The Rav Shimon Bar Yochai revealed the Zohar, revealed the Kabbalah on Lag BaOmer. That's the reason. Or it's a Torah snister, the hidden Torahs were revealed. So too on Tu B'Av, the Gemara lists 6 different reasons. So that's a discussion. Is it a combo factor? Is it all 6 reasons together make it into a quasi yontif? Or do I say no? Or do I say that each one independently is enough to make it into a yontif? So that's how the Vilna Gaon seems to say. Each one independently makes it into a. Each one, the fact that the tribes got back together, they could intermarry with one another. The fact the Jews started marrying Shevet Binyamin, the Mesei at Midbar stopped dying, that Hoshea ben Elo removed the guards, and the Haruge Beitar, the miracle happened, that even though the bodies were lying there for years, Hatov HaMeitav, Hatov Shelo Nitzru, the good was that they didn't rot, and Ameitiv Shenitnu L'Kfur, they were able to be buried, and they stopped cutting the wood for the altar because the sun, it's starting to cool down in Israel. The sun reaches its zenith during Tu B'Av, and therefore the sun's very strong and keeps the worms out of the wood. Once Tu B'Av comes, so they no longer cut trees for the Beis HaMikdash because the sun's not hot enough to ensure that the worms. So that's what the Vilna Gaon writes. That each one independently warrants their own simcha, but others say it's the combination of all. So that's the same issue by Lag BaOmer. But that's what the Vilna Gaon says. The source of our yontif of Lag BaOmer, it's a mixas yontif. That's because we got it from the Gemara like, I just got from David Teller. What? No Wi-Fi? How come you didn't tune him in? He wants to know.
Oh dear.
So
we'll have to get this up.
I'll have to tell him Jason didn't have Wi-Fi. So, but that's what they point out, and that's what they point out as well, as we said. That that's the source, because it's this week's parasha as well. V'yachalta v'savato v'rachta, the mitzvah min Torah of Birkas Hamazon. That the Gemara tells us that Moshe instituted the first bracha Hazanas HaKol based on the man that, as we said, B'schus Moshe Rabbeinu, that had the man for 40 years in the Midbar, and then again, so that's a discussion. When did the Jews in the Midbar have the same benching we have? So Pashtus, no. In other words, obviously they just said Hazanas HaKol. They had the man. It wasn't until Yoshua instituted the second bracha, no delacha. So when they moved after the Sheva Shekivshu v'Sheva Shechilku, the 7 years that took them to conquer the land, and the 7 years they divided it. So at that point, then Yoshua instituted to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu also on the gift of Eretz Yisrael. That was instituted later on, and then later, and they didn't thank God in the Beis HaMikdash. They didn't have one yet. It wasn't until the time of Shlomo and David where they instituted the third. But the Gemara seems to say that the first 3 brachas are min haTorah. That the first 3 brachas we make in Birkas Hamazon are biblically ordained. Obviously, they might have been, the actual text was given later on, but the biblical in nature. The 4th bracha was actually a machlokas in the Gemara, but we assume it's only rabbinical in nature regarding Haruge Beitar. That because Atov B'Hameitiv, Atov Shenitzruchu, and after that's only a Din Rabbanim. We'll have to continue on that.